Welcome, everyone, to the Affiliated Podcast. Again, we have a special in-studio episode, which, you know what that means. We have alcohol. But before we jump into the alcohol, I did want to tell you why this is so exciting today. So if you're out there and you are somebody that is creating content, you are somebody that has a thought leader, or yourself, you're just looking to be on podcasts, you might currently be on them, or have the ability in your business to be on podcasts, this is the episode for you. If you want to be on the other seat of this, but more importantly, how do you take the strategy of being on a podcast and turn it into more than just an hour, 45 minutes of you talking to somebody else, but actually turn it into a huge part of your business that's going to strategically grow and be a massive revenue driver. And today, that's exactly what we're going to talk about with our special guest today. We have Dustin Reichmann. I almost said it wrong because he told me not to say it that way. And now it's all I could think about. But Dustin Reichmann today, and super excited to have you. How are you doing, man?
Doing awesome. Beautiful journey here to Boise. My first time in Boise, first time to ClickBank. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on and share with your audience.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you. And afterwards, we'll show you some cool parts about downtown Boise before we grab some good food. It'll be a good time. And luckily, it's amazing weather. I know you guys could tell by our studio. Obviously, amazing weather, but no, really fantastic. Well, it is a tradition that anytime we have an in-person guest come in, we like to make sure there's a drink tailored to just them, because a big part of this industry is networking, which also means drinking is a big part of it. So I chose actually for you one of my favorite rums, so Bamboo, which is a great spice rum. Shout out to Roz. You got me onto it, and it rocks. So I know you're listening, and this is a good one. But I specifically chose this because I think spice rum is delightful, but who do you know that just drinks spice rum? It's not meant to be by itself. It needs something else to really bring out the flavors, bring out the joy, and that's exactly why I got it for you, because being a guest on a podcast, it gets the job done, right? You're there, you're talking, but if you don't combine it with strategy, you don't combine it with more, you don't have something else to it, it's just not really going to bring out all the flavors, everything you could do, which is why we brought it for you today. And we're going to be making Dark and Stormies, where the dark and stormy part of acquisition might be a little bit cloudy. It won't be after we make this drink in this podcast. When we jump on in here.
I'm very excited. I've actually had this specific rum, and I had it at a rum bar, which I didn't even know was a thing. So this is like maybe 18 months ago. I was in St. Louis near where I live. I was like, what is this place? It was a rum bar. And I went in and discovered dark rum for the first time, because I'm actually a bourbon drinker.
Yeah.
And I could really appreciated it, because I'd only ever had, Bacardi and know, like you said, the spice rum. So this stuff's really good. I'm excited to see the concoction that you're putting together here.
Well, I'll have to tell you, so I mentioned my friend Roz here, let me onto it. I was in Romania. He's like, dude, you have to have this rum. I was like, okay. It looked like a pirate bottle. And I was like, all right. And I tried it again in a dark and stormy, best dark and stormy I ever had before. And for those that aren't familiar with the dark and stormy, this is basically, think of it as a Moscow Mule, but instead of a Moscow Mule, we're adding spiced rum. So we're getting the Russian out of it, and we're bringing in the Caribbean. So it's going to be 2 ounces here. But what happened is I had dark stormy. I was like, this stuff is amazing. It happened to be in the, I didn't know this was sold stateside. So when I saw it in the duty free, I was like, yes. I almost bought 2 of them just because I didn't want to be without it. No, it's available everywhere. I really kind of over worried. But afterwards, I went on a journey to see how many things this tastes good in. And it is a lot. So I seemed like an alcoholic for a short period, because I think I put it in my coffee. I put it in, I tried it with Coke. I tried it with Dr. Pepper. I was putting in everything I possibly could, because it's just such an awesome flavor. So, but 2, we'll say this, 2 winning combinations. Tink.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Good selection.
I love Bamboo. And again, for those out there, it's just, I think it has some of the most beautiful caramely notes. If you like Kraken, this stuff's better. So, with that though, as we move away from delicious drinks and dark and stormy things, let's talk a little bit actually about your background. So Dustin and I, most people don't become experts in anything just when they're born and get into it. So how do you find yourself in this world of working with podcasters and selling stuff and online marketing in general? Kind of walk us through your journey.
Yeah, the very short version is I was actually an engineer for 15 years, a traffic engineer, but not website traffic, like vehicular traffic. So,
wait, so you're like setting like lights? What does that mean?
Yeah, synchronizing lights, designing interchanges, improving safety, all sorts of things. So you got some awesome streetscape projects going on in downtown Boise. So things like that, like how can we calm traffic, make it safer for pedestrians and bicyclists, complete street solutions. So I did that stuff for 15 years.
That's so
And
interesting.
about half that time, I had side hustles as well. And so my very first business was a marriage business. It grew out of marriage ministry that I was doing with my wife. I was like, you know what? This can come out of the church basements and let's bring it online. So figured out how to create websites and do my own marketing, wrote a book. That got me pulled over into digital marketing in a pretty deep way.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with digital marketing and realized that that's really what I wanted to do. So as the sole breadwinner and 3 kids at home, I quit my engineering job after 15 years and went full-time doing marketing consulting.
Wow.
So that was around 2017. So that exposed me to many different industries and markets and local and online and like literally everything from helping dentists to like selling barbecue sauces and everything in between.
Yeah.
And one of the things that emerged from that, which is going to get us to podcasting, is a business partnership with a company called Fire Creek Snacks. So this local butcher shop, 3rd generation, cool guy as the owner. I was helping him with his local marketing. And he said, hey, man, can you sell stuff online? I was like, sure. So I was like, let me try to create like a Shopify store. And we went that whole route. And
what was the product? What kind of snacks?
it's like a healthy meat stick, basically. So a healthy Slim Jim, people would say, and we would get offended by. But like a true hickory smoked, like old fashioned way of doing things with no allergens. My business partner's one of their twin boys developed a severe food allergy. And that's where the whole idea behind the product came, is like, there's got to be a clean way to make these kinds of products that the entire family can enjoy.
Yeah.
So I got involved in that. So for a couple of years, I was doing Fire Creek Snacks as a sales and marketing lead and a partner, and I was still running all my own consulting for my clients. And then COVID happened, right? So everyone's 2020 story. So this is where podcasting enters the mix. Is we had grown Fire Creek Snacks online, and then we really got into brick and mortar and wholesale. So we started doing trade shows, and we did a dozen trade shows in 2019. Had done a couple in 2020. I was literally driving from St. Louis to Chicago for an Ace Hardware trade show. Hey, it's canceled. I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on here? So, and then I proceeded to lose about 80% of my marketing clients because they were local businesses that were shut down in our state. And of course, there's all that uncertainty, and people are like, well, I'm not going to pay for marketing. So,
I don't even know if I'm going to have a company.
Exactly.
Let's see what happens in a couple weeks, right?
So I went through a couple months of deep uncertainty and chaos. And then in summer 2020, I was like, you know what? I've heard many brand owners, including people in our industry with Fire Creek Snacks, be interviewed on podcasts as a way to market. And I'm like, I'm stuck at home with all my kids doing homeschool around me. And I was like, maybe this is something I can do. So I pitched my first podcast in summer 2020. It was Nick Loper from Side Hustle Nation. If anyone's familiar, it's a pretty good sized podcast.
Yeah.
And so I got on there and basically told the story of how we took a local product and we're selling it online, because it was very newsworthy at the time, because there's a lot of local businesses struggling and or shut down. So I did that. Actually loved it. We made some sales. I basically just gave a coupon code at the end of it and was like, someone wants some meat sticks, like you can support our small business and this mission that we're on. And was wildly successful in my eyes because I had very low expectations.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to sell meat sticks to random people on the internet.
Not necessarily the target demographic.
No
right?
target market at all.
Super broad. That's awesome though.
Yeah, but it worked. And so basically from there, I just started doing it over and over and started finding different types of shows and kind of found my legs as far as the things I love to talk about and my own story and the business side of Fire Creek. So it was all about growing Fire Creek Snacks for the first 12 months that I started doing podcast guesting. And we ended up growing it substantially. It became its own story of growing this e-commerce brand without paid ads and doing it in a very non-traditional way through relationship building and storytelling and some of the things I'm sure we'll get into here shortly. And so that was how I got into podcast guesting. Once the word got out and people started observing, I started getting inbound contacts like, hey, really interesting offer, or I loved your story, or, can you show me how to do this? And so that's what pulled me into the coaching world for the first time in 2021 was people just wanted me to help them with podcast guesting and related things like podcast hosting, YouTube growth, things like that. And so I started doing this one-on-one offer while I was still doing marketing consulting and still running Fire Creek Snacks.
Oh, man.
And was still doing some contract work for engineering, if I'm being honest, because we were trying to pull ourselves out of all the ugliness of 2020.
Losing 80% of your portfolio and then months of being like, well, I guess this is life now as your kids are, we don't know anything.
Exactly. And it was, kudos to the engineering company. So I left there in 2017 on very good terms and just stayed in contact a little bit with some people I had hired. And basically when everything went down, as the world shut down, on the private side, the public side was getting an influx of money. So there were actually tons of engineering projects. So I was like, hey, I'm available if you guys have some work.
Right,
so I just started doing work as like contract work, and it kept the family afloat, gave me some security while I was figuring this new world out that I was entering. So yeah, if we can get into the details, but fast forward to today as we sit here, am actually exiting my partnership at Fire Creek to my business partner, and he's going to run with that because I'm fully committed to what I'm doing now, which is
Well, actually, I want to stop you. I meant to do this earlier. We're going to circle back to this,
Yeah.
but I just want to make a really good point, because I think a lot of people, one of the things that oftentimes the entrepreneurial journey feels like a commitment to a master of some expertise. You got to jump in with 2 feet and just figure it out, right? I have very rarely ever met an entrepreneur that was their story. There are some, but they are very few and far between. Most people, I just think it's really important to bring up the diversification of skills, right? You had a skill that had nothing to do with marketing, except for the idea of, I would say, in online marketing, knowing systems and the way that systems should be optimized for whatever the end goal is. Very valuable in any business, and I would say almost anything you do, right? But I just think it's really cool that, one, that diversity, the multi-set of skills, saved you. It saved you and your family and allowed this dream to continue on. And I think so much of this burning the bridge mentality is very easy when I want to sell a course to get you fully bought in, but it is not practical to real success. Use all of your skills, grow them naturally, grow them as they make sense, and keep the things that you have and already do well open and available, because you never know. You might need it again. So I just had to pause and make that point.
I super appreciate it. Most people, I actually don't share that often, because most people seem to dismiss it like, oh, you're kind of a loser. You had to go back and do contract work. It's like, well, I have 3 kids and a wife that's a stay-at-home mom. So no, I'm not a loser. I was very grateful for it. And, just as an example of not burning bridges and the importance of, I view the entire world as collaboration, abundance, and relationships.
Yeah.
So when I told my boss at the time, like, hey, because I was, I had 30 people on my team. I had basically created this entire practice within this firm, and it was a startup within a larger company. And it was very unexpected. Hey, it's January 3rd. I'd like to have lunch with you. That kind of conversation. But in this conversation, he says, not screw you. I can't believe you're doing this to us. Like, wow, man, good for you. Like, I knew you were doing some stuff on the side. I'm glad this is working so well. I'm the president of the Engineers Club of St. Louis. We could use a new website. Would you give us a proposal? So, like, literally, as I quit my engineering job, he's like, I'd like to be one of your clients. Yeah. And that's how it should be. So obviously, there's a toxic culture and things you got to get out. But for the most part, don't burn bridges. You never know when those relationships are going to pay dividends, both ways. So.
And I love that you said a lot of people feel like, oh, you're a loser, you had to go back. Like, that is such a poor definition of success, right? So it's just, again, whatever makes the most sense for your family at that point in time. And I bet you still even learned a lot coming back from that. It wasn't empty skills, right? So I'm glad we took just a quick detour, because I know there's a lot of people out there that sometimes you feel like there's one way, you have to be like an inhuman psychopath. It's like, no, that's a lie someone probably told you. Or there are some inhuman psychopaths that become very successful, but they're very miserable people because they're inhuman psychopaths, right? Exactly. So we don't want to be that. So it's just a good point. But anyway, so that was going very successful. You started exiting. The last thing you're saying is you're exiting the partnership with Fireside and Fireside Snacks.
Fire Creek. Yeah.
Fire Creek. Because I think we have Fireside marshmallows around here. So I keep thinking those aren't the same, right? Because I know I bought Fire something before. Anyway, so you're exiting the partnership with that and then really growing into this coaching business. That's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah. So the coaching business has really taken off. We've had consecutive years of like 10x leaps in the company. Wow. Yeah. So it's now a 7-figure business of its own. I'm starting to hire a team for the first time. So it needs my full attention. And I've, I'm just not the guy I was 2 years ago when I was passionate about running, sales and marketing at Fire Creek. I've got something I know is working really well. I'm serving so far the highest, value I've been able to provide in the professional world. And so, I just love it. I just absolutely love it. And if anyone's familiar with like 10x is easier than 2x or, any of the Dan Sullivan work, that making this 80-20 split of I got to fully devote myself to the 20% of my zone of genius. It requires stripping away some things you really like in the 80%. And so this has been a difficult decision, and it's been a time coming. It's been a lot of open communication with my business partner about it, but we all agree it's the right thing to do. So I can step more fully into that 20% that I love, which is coaching, leading masterminds, teaching people this strategy about how to build relationships at scale and some of the things we're going to get into on the deeper side of podcast guesting. So.
Oh man, I really want to jump into it, but you said something I just can't let go because I just think it's so darn good. And I know we're going into some of the personal development side, but it's just, I love what you said when you say, hey, the 80-20 rule, and you got to put that 80% towards that 20 part you do really well, like really, really focus a lot of those efforts, but you have to start letting things go that you really like. You don't have to tell me what all those are, but I'd love if you could, if there's any bit that you could share of something you had to say, oh, I love that, but in reality, this is where I have to be. I'm just kind of curious. It might have been Fire Creek snacks, but I'm just kind of curious if there's anything you can share of one of those things you had to let go.
Yeah, I mean, in a big sense, it's these like other businesses, right? Because I've always had since 2009, I had my first online business. Before that, I was doing other kind of side hustles. I've always had multiple things going. So basically, sunsetting Engaged Marriage, which was the very first business, has been running like organically for years now. And trying to find the right new owner for that. Stepping out of the partnership with Fire Creek Snacks. Those are big picture things. But yeah, within the 7-Figure Leap business, which is my main business now, like I'm now hiring and training people to run masterminds instead of me. And and I love running masterminds, but there's only one Dustin, right?
Yeah.
So for this to scale the impact the way I want it to scale, I've got to replace myself in things that I'm actually very good at that are not my zone of genius. Like my zone of genius is now at the thought leadership level, like writing books and speaking from stages and being the CEO of what's going to be a $10 million company. That identity is very different than the Dustin who grew a 7-figure solo business, which is the Dustin of 3 months ago, right? Like so I'm stepping into this new identity, and that's challenging. And it's, at first I was resistant to it, but I'm actually really enjoying it because it's a whole different creative process than like creating products or offers, which I like all that. I get to exercise and flex a lot of the muscles that I've loved doing over the years with my clients. So I have this outlet of like, hey, we're on a mastermind call. Let's talk about your offer and let's see how we can optimize it. And let's talk about which podcast you should go on. Let's write your pitch. But I don't have to do, I'm not doing that in my own business because I'm at a point in my own business where I've surpassed, where that makes sense for me financially. So yeah. So anyway, I feel very blessed that I'm like every day interacting with really ambitious, smart entrepreneurs, and I get to like play in their sandboxes. And I get to go put my big boy pants on and see what it's like to grow a $10 million company, which is the next milestone I want to hit with 7-Figure Leap. So.
Dude, that's awesome. I know it's another detour, but what I think really inspiring thing to say. Because some things, it is hard to let go of those things. And, it represents not only a joy, not only something created, but also a sense of stability, right? You mentioned before, there was a time that diversification saved you. And now to commit to everything has to feel a little bit scary. But I imagine, like you said, it's lighting your brain on fire with new creativity, new things, new genius, and what else would we live for other than that, right? Learning new stuff, growing, that's just awesome. So, well, let's jump into it now. Let's talk about the real strategy. What are the nitty gritty here? So just to highlight it here, you took just something that was brick and mortar without having to spend any ads with a physical product and you used podcasts to grow that to. Can you give me a sense of size, or at least maybe the difference from when you started the podcast to you ended the podcast in terms of a top line for the company?
Yeah, so I focused on running the podcast guesting strategy that we're going to be unpacking here. I focused on that for about a year, so there's not really a delineated like start date, end date, and there's one of the cool things about podcast guesting is it's long tail.
Yeah.
So it kind of lives on. So we still get benefits from stuff I did 3 years ago. But in general, the story was that started getting picked up by others as we grew. We basically sold our first 7 figures of snack sticks online without doing paid ads.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that came in numerous forms and fashions. Like part of it was just direct to consumer sales, right? But we also landed a huge opportunity with the biggest subscription box in the United States through a very strategic targeting of a podcast, a relationship that I saw was really valuable.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be very valuable, and it turned out to actually be a $500,000 purchase order for us. We ended up in Walmart, in a test market in Walmart through the relationship that came from one of the podcasts I was on. So that's the beautiful thing about this is we'll unpack it is there's the systematic predictable sales part of it. Like, hey, if you get on this many shows, you should probably, and you have a good offer, you should be able to get this amount of revenue. But the best part of it is like the unicorn stuff, right? Like, I was on this one show and this one person heard it and they reached out, and it turned out that like they changed my life. You know, it's like
Yeah.
these opportunities that you could never predict, but they actually are the coolest part of it. And so I just view the whole world in the sense of marketing is just planting seeds. And you don't know if those seeds are going to sprout at all. You don't know if they're going to sprout the day the thing's published, a year later. But every once in a while, a bamboo tree comes out of nowhere, and you're like, holy crap, like I didn't expect this. So but yeah, anyway, so for Fire Creek Snacks, the short story, 7-figure business without paid ads and e-com, and then got pretty great results in the wholesale, brick and mortar world in non-traditional ways. Like we never had a broker. We were very scrappy, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
It was just Ryan and I.
Well, I imagine it almost, because you had such a large presence, it changed the terms that you were able to get as well. So that's really nice. Well, let's dial it back a little bit as we talk about the strategy, because I'm really excited. I mean, if anyone wasn't excited to this point, when they just heard that, like, it's not only going to increase your top line, it's opening up opportunity in ways you can't even see or predict. Plus the strategy you talked about, targeted to go after a specific individual and it being a huge sale. We're going to get into that. But beforehand, I just want to establish, what is the way that you see most people when they come to you? How are they treating their business in regards to podcasts and being on episodes? What does that look like? And what's maybe the first thing you tell them, you got to start doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, when someone comes to me, they're in one of two buckets. So they're like, hey, Dustin, I happened my way onto like this show, and the interview went really well, and I got 2 clients from it, and I was like super happy. I wish I could do this like repeatedly or like as a system. Or the bucket is, I'm really good at getting on podcasts. I've been on 100, and I'm like, great. Like, how much money have you made? How much has that benefited your business? And they're like, oh, none. I'm like, well, that's not good. So like, there's this, obviously there's a marriage here of getting on the right shows, telling the right stories with the right offer, and doing it repeatedly and doing it in a way that's scalable and systematic. And so that's what we do, is we actually create what I now call a podcast guesting flywheel in people's businesses. So, but to go back to the basics here, the way I look at this and teach it and frame it for people is it's like a 5-step framework. And I'll just go through them real quick, and then we can jam on whichever ones you might want to talk about. They're all P's. So purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit. Challenging my plane brain here after being on an airplane all day.
I'm glad we went with more P's, right?
Yeah, more P's. Okay, so and real briefly, so we start with purpose, and this is actually the thing that puts people in those buckets most often. The buckets of failure is they never actually got clear on why they want to be on a podcast, who they want to target, what story they're going to tell. So it's just this idea of getting really clear on the strategy behind what you're doing. So what are the KPIs? What are we trying to drive, right? So when we work with people, we say, I know you want to get on shows and you want to write pitches. We'll do that, but we got to first figure out which shows you want to talk to and why, and what do you want to talk about, You'd be amazed at how many people skip that step.
Yeah.
So we start with purpose, which is the first P. And then from purpose, we go to plan. So once we know why we want to be on shows, plan is just the P that I can use to basically say research, right? Like, now we figure out which shows to be on. So that's getting our target list of podcasts that we know we'd be a great guest on. Their audience would be receptive to us. There's great relationships to leverage from it. So that's the second P is plan. Third P is pitch. So once we have a list of shows we want to be on, we have to actually ask them and compel them to let us on. So there's, I think, a misnomer if people haven't done this. And this was me in 2020 when I was like, these guys are getting on these podcasts. There's got to be a reason why, and I don't know how they're doing it. And I was like, I'm just going to ask one. And I was like, the first 12 I asked said yes. So it turned out I had a knack for the pitch, but you always get told no, right? If you don't ask. So the secret though is that most people aren't on shows because they're like fraternity brothers or sorority sisters, or in most cases it's a cold pitch. Like in most cases it's like someone and we can talk about pitching the right way and the wrong way. So not cold in a negative sense, but like there's not a personal relationship most of the time.
They don't know you. It's not like you weren't drinking at a family reunion. You're like, hey, you want to be on my podcast?
Right.
Like, no, it's hello, stranger. I'd like to talk to you.
Yeah, and here's how I can serve your audience. And that should be the posture of the message, right? But so pitching is really important. And after pitching, step 4 is perform. So they said, yes, awesome. Now what the heck are you going to talk about? What stories are you going to share? What are you going to teach? And most importantly, what's going to be your call to action at the end of this opportunity? Because you might get 30, 45 minutes to educate the audience, build this know, like, and trust factor that we're all passionate about doing in marketing. And if you just blow it at the end because you don't ask them to do it, you don't ask the audience to take the next step, it's a huge, huge fail. So we coach people through how to perform well. And then the 5th P is profit. So most people who think about podcast guesting, and if you've interviewed anyone else about it, or if you go look it up on the internet, what you'll find is there are like podcast booking agencies where basically you can say, hey, I want to be on 4 shows a month. And they're like, great, it's a couple $1,000s, cool. There's 2 big flaws with that. One is there is no step 1. There is no purpose. Like it may be a surface level conversation, but there's no deep strategy behind what you're doing. And the other huge problem with that is step 5, which is profit, is literally, and I said 80-20 before, but literally 80% of what we work with people on when they're in our main program is step 5. So those first 4 steps take about 30 days to get the whole system built, the pitches written, knowing which shows you're going to be on, being coached. And that, and that's very valuable. However, the most of the value comes after each show gets published, and what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So that's what step 5 is. So we spend 8 of our 12 weeks in our main program on profit. So it's like, great. Once you've got this thing running, how do you have a virtual assistant run it for you? How do we scale it? And then we get into like offers and lead magnets and sales funnels and referrals and all this stuff and relationship building that comes from it. And so again, most people think, oh, I got on a podcast, I'm going to be rich.
I made it. I'm here.
Yeah,
look at me, Ma.
That's great, and you will get benefit from just being on shows, but you're going to get more benefit if you're way more intentional about what you do after each show.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that, oftentimes you might only be on a show once. So if you're not prepared for that opportunity could go by the wayside inefficiently, and you're just going to miss out on that great opportunity. Yeah. So now going back to just a couple of questions in some of the 5 Ps.
Right.
So on the purpose side, like, have you found situations, are there scenarios where people's purpose gets too narrow, where you might find, okay, we have 5 podcasts that you could get on that might actually monetize? Like, is that, like, how do you avoid that? Is that a common thing? I imagine you probably get people too broad.
I say it's almost always the opposite problem of like, I don't want to only talk to, and we can get into how we look at target markets and
we will. I have questions about that.
Intent versus identity. There's a lot to that. But I think a very simple example to drive this home for people, like, what does he mean by purpose? One of the exercises we do is simple on the surface, but gets pretty deep pretty quick. Is it just a before and after transformation matrix? And so basically what we say is on the left side of the piece of paper, if people want to like visualize this, we put like have, feel, average day, status. And then we put the column next to that at the top, we put before, and the column next to that, we put after. And so we're simply saying, hey, Kyle, you've got this amazing health coaching offer. Your ideal client, in their words, how do they feel before they meet you?
Yeah.
And, in relevance to what you do. So tired, sluggish, no energy, all these very descriptive words. So what do they have? Like they have poor eating habits. They have low energy, right? How do they feel? Tired, grumpy, distressed, whatever, and then status, average day. So you start putting very clear words and language to how they feel. And then I say, great, if you can work with them in your highest and best program and you get the ultimate transformation, how are they going to describe how they feel? What do they have? What's their average day? And in doing that, you have to pick someone to transform, which is very clarifying. And then you actually start to, at first, guess if you don't have experience. But once you have experience, you actually go to your clients and say, how are you feeling? How did you feel before we met? And you actually start getting their words. And what's so powerful about that is those words then get used throughout the rest of our process, because the story that you're going to tell to express empathy in the interview is going to use the before words of your ideal clients, right?
Yeah,
and you're going to be able to say, oftentimes it's your own story, but sometimes it's a client story. And when I met Kyle, he told me he was feeling bloated and tired and
that's a rough year.
Nothing
Dustin,
personal.
Come on.
Drinking a lot of dark rum to get through the day. But then, after we got the chance to work together in our 90-day transformation program, he felt this way and this way and this way. And you can imagine if you're hearing that and you're in the before state, you get that dynamic of like, oh my gosh, it's like he's in my head. It's like he's using the words that I'm even scared to tell my wife about. It's like, so we're getting a little deep with it, but that is just one example of like, when I say get clear about who you're serving and how and what transformation you provide, like that's how we do it. It's one of the tools that we use.
Yeah, no, I love that. I remember it's funny because you're talking about like the marriage program we had. Another guy from a relationship world. I think it's Life Mastery Institute. I could be getting that wrong. But he talked about when he has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, but he started much lower than that. And the first thing he did is he visualized every YouTube video, visualize exactly who he's talking to.
That's awesome.
And exactly what he wants them to hear, so that message comes out so much more powerfully. And I always love that, because I think it's exactly what you're talking about. You need to visualize who you're talking to and as one individual person, and realize that's probably a lot of people, right? But that's the person you're talking to. I love that. No, that's great. So, well, we're going to skip some P's, because I want to jump. I'm going to jump around a bit. I want to talk a little bit about profit, and then I want to circle back to that strategy where you targeted somebody super specific. But I think the profit side, I love a little bit more clarity, because you sent some exciting things in there in terms of lead magnets, offers, things like that. So, to lead this off, what I'm actually really curious about is walk me through. Well, first explain kind of the offers phase, and then if you could walk me through how the offer transformed over your Fire Creek snack times. And is it Fire Creek? Is it Fireside?
It is. You got it.
Okay, I keep wanting to say Fireside every time.
It may be more interesting to talk about how the offer changed in my coaching business, because it's been very dramatic. Whereas
Please
Fire Creek was
answer
different
better than what I would have
bundles
done.
and different offers.
Yeah, let's do that.
And at some point you have to make sure before this cup's empty that we talk about the flywheel effect and what I mean by that, because that's really powerful. It's a really powerful concept. But yes, and
we'll save your target strategy for last, because that's the most interesting. We'll go to flywheel after this.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about offers. So one thing I should be very clear about is on the podcast itself, your offer is almost always going to be something free or very low ticket, right? So for Fire Creek, we're selling $2 meat sticks, so given a coupon code, it's not like a huge barrier of entry. For most coaching, consulting, professional services, I would be looking at what, if people are familiar with the lead magnet, the juicy carrot to get someone to give you their email address so you can follow up with them. And so that's one offer, is like the offer you make at the end of the interview, which is the call to action. Like, hey, Kyle, this has been an amazing time. If anyone got value from this and they want to go further, what's the next step? Well, it's not, well, I got this $10,000 thing you can go buy. It's like, oh, no, here you can book a free call, or you can get this guide, you can get this checklist, you can get this assessment. That's an offer. But then on the back end, in the profit side of things, we're actually going to make money from this. That's the offer of what you're going to sell, right? And so in my world, if we talk about targeting, I have a pretty loose targeting around identity. That's much more intent based, meaning people want a specific result. Our promise for our offer is now add a $100,000 marketing channel to your business using podcast guesting, or basically make money by telling your story. Who I serve are mission-driven entrepreneurs, which requires a little explanation. But the main thing in the people that I serve is that they have a story, right? It's like they have a reason why they do what they do. They have a story behind why they do what they do. Therefore, this medium of podcast guesting works really well. And so in that world, though, many of those mission-driven experts tend to look like coaches, consultants, agency owners, some exceptions. There's some people in corporate and executive roles, but most of the time, it's most of the people I work with are solopreneurs who are experts at something. They're really passionate about it. They can teach all day. They love teaching. They love helping, but they're not really good at consistently generating leads for their high-ticket offers. So this is all to get to the point of high-ticket offers. So in that world, many people do one-on-one coaching, and what we'll work with them on is what would this look like if it was a group coaching program? What would this look like if it was a mastermind? And so I've got this dynamic now where people come be in my program to experience it, so they can go serve their people in that way. Because it's a much more scalable, to me, it's a much better and higher impact offer than a one-on-one coaching offer, which is where a lot of people are kind of stuck. Same is true of consulting. Productized services are way better than customized one-off services. So when I say offer, it's really getting people more value in what they're providing, making it easier to sell, and tying it very directly from that call to action on the podcast. What are the things that we're going to do to enable someone to make a really strong yes to your high ticket offer? And that high ticket offer itself is much improved as well. So it's kind of the invisible part, but the most important part of this process, which is what happens after you do a great interview and you've got a strong call to action and people are getting on your email list and this thing goes live. Then what? To actually grow your business, right? And that's how we actually generate the revenue, is through the things we do on the back end with each show, as well as making people much more referable, plugging them into a community and a network where they've got a lot of collaboration and referrals. So it's multifaceted, but offers, hopefully I've simplified that enough, is what happens on the show, and then most importantly, what happens after that so you can actually make a lot of money for your business.
Yeah, no, that's such a big part. And I think you hit so many things that I see a lot of people struggle with. The one-on-one coaching one's huge.
Yeah.
We see that all the time with clients that come in. They're like, well, I want to do one-on-one coaching. That's like, and I was like, wow, you really want to waste your time and cap out how much money you can make because.
I mean, it's a good place to start.
Yeah,
but once you've got a
is.
proven, and we can talk about the evolution of my offers, and I started with one-on-one coaching, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know any better, and I didn't have anything else to
learn a
offer.
lot, and
but
you
once
learn
I
a lot.
figured
too
out I had a
from it.
5P framework, and I figured out there was a process. Then I realized I could do this in small groups, and I was like, oh wait, I can actually add more community and more deeper facilitation and just a more strategic, deeper experience.
Yeah.
And now it's a mastermind, and so each of those levels is more premium. It's more, it feels more exclusive to be in it, and for me, the type of clients I attract gets better and better and better. And then the virtuous cycle starts to kick in of, well, as I have great alumni coming out of my program and they're going out and having a better impact in the world. And then they're talking about how they improve their stuff. And it comes back to me. That's important. Plus now, if you decide to join my program upon graduation and when you finish, you're not like everything's community based. So now it's like you go from a group of 12 in your mastermind to like, oh, now I'm in a group of 150 of amazing people all doing really cool stuff who love this world of collaboration.
All
and so
speaking the same
that
language.
actually ends up being like the most valuable thing I do, but I don't sell it that way because that's not how people buy. But that is, looking 18 months from when I started till now, like that has actually become the core value driver is the community I've built and the network I've built. Of course, I didn't start there, but I think that's important for people to think about what can I start with that will enable me to ultimately have this more scalable version of the business rather than saying, I just want to do one-on-one coaching the rest of my life and it's $1,000 a month. And it's like, great, that's fine if you want to make $10,000 a month forever. But most people as entrepreneurs aren't thinking that way. So.
Yeah, exactly. And we realize you just could keep charging more. That's not that appealing, right? So no, I really love it. And I think one of the things that I think stood out to me that again is the idea of building a process for each step. The other thing I want to point out, the fact that you really actually describe how community gets built and why it's so valuable, but also why you can't sell it. I tell people this all the time, like, oh, I want to sell community. It's like, stop. It's very valuable. It's good to build. No one gives a crap about it until they're inside of it. It is, you need to sell community, you build it into the program. You have to train people to get there. And it's cool when you have it because if you build a good community, it almost manages itself. And you build people in, and then you talk about, like, you don't have to have one-on-ones because the people in community will almost do that for you. So it really, really transitions and allows you to step away and get that bigger stuff.
I'm very passionate about this topic, so I'm glad you said that. I mean, because that's another thing when people come with offers, like, I want to build a membership site. It's like, I wouldn't start there. You know, it's like, this should be on the back of things. Even my whole marriage business was initially all digital courses. I would partner with experts. I never felt like I was an actual expert. So I partnered with experts. You know, it was this theme of collaboration. And I would handle the marketing and the sales. And then basically they would give me the rights to put it into a membership area. But I had very little success saying, pay us $19 a month and be in our membership. If I said, this program's $19, and then it's like, oh, and as a bonus, you get the first 30 days in our community for free. Would you like to do that? That built the community rapidly, but it was selling a front-end product, not selling the community.
Totally.
And in a much expanded version of that now, like the thing I sell is a 90-day program. And I think this is really important for people to understand. No matter what industry you're in, whether it's supplements or coaching or whatever, you have to sell a discrete promise up front, like a finite promise for a finite price. So like an offer is a promise for a price. And so it's way easier for me to say, hey, work with us for 90 days. You're going to add a 6-figure marketing channel to your business. We have we curate the groups. It's not like anyone can sign up. So I also have an ROI guarantee. Like it's pretty robust. But that's what I sell. Like, you should use podcast guesting to add a 6-figure marketing channel to your business. So that's what they buy on day 1. And on day 90, when they're done, they're like, oh my gosh, this has changed my life. And I met all these amazing people and I see the world differently and I have a much better mindset. And this community is everything to me. And so it's like, cool. On day 91, you have the opportunity to continue on in our 7-Figure Leap Mastermind community, which is currently led by me. And, we talked, I will be ascending to different levels of this, but you can imagine though, on day 91, you're like, I miss being with my people. And it's like, well, your people are moving on to this community, and there's like 100, now there's like 20. But there's like, there's these other people that you can also be in community with. And at that point, they totally get the value of community, and it's the easiest sale. I literally don't have a sales page. It's just like, would you like to be in this? Because it's like more of what we've been doing at more advanced levels. And they're like, heck yeah.
Yeah.
But they've bought into the community at that point.
And then they go into the community not knowing what it'll give them.
Yes.
And ready to give back. Because that's one of the keys and why I think memberships are so hard to maintain and keep a good community when you sell it on the front end. Exactly what you're talking about. Because if I'm paying for a membership, instantly I'm asking what it'll give me right away.
Yes.
And I don't want to engage. I just want to immediately deliver me value. And if that doesn't happen, you disengage very, very quickly. Yes. And I remember doing a lot of study on this because I got really curious on subscriptions and continuity. Yeah. And I was like, the best continuity products are ones that you will engage with on a very regular basis. You have forced yourself to engage with it. Mm-hmm. So it's like everything should center around how they engage, not how you market and sell it. Because you can spend all the time in the world, and if people don't care and they don't engage with the membership because it's convenient, well, no, if they're not engaging with it, you're going to have to trick them into keeping it. Yeah. And that's not sustainable. So I agree with you. I'm glad you brought this up, because actually sometimes I tell people to stop selling continuity. Most times like don't, because they're trying to sell it like it'll bring me money every single month. Right. Like that's the wrong attitude.
How do you serve your client? And if it becomes monthly recurring revenue, awesome. And to your point, I'm leading it. I have given it the structure and the life that it has.
It's an utterless community, right?
But I think what's cool is I'm in Boise this week. The next 2 weeks I'm in Italy with my wife, and I basically just went to 2 or 3 of my members who I know are really good at facilitation. I was like, hey, can you guys cover these calls? And they're like, absolutely, I'd love to. It's like it's running without me even before it officially runs without me.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, even if you ever really want to get really good at building communities, study a lot of cult leaders. Yeah. Because it is prototype. It's the best way to build it. And what you're talking about is you create your own heroes amongst the community. Anyway, I get too nerdy on this stuff.
I got a whole teaching and talk about how I do masterminds is literally like the Jesus model. So there's something to that, and what you're saying of like having a place for discipleship, discernment, evangelization. Yeah, I can't say it, but too much dark rum. Right. But you know what I'm saying though. But like this idea that you start with, can have a central leader who has the ideas, but as they go 2 by 2 to spread that message, and it actually becomes a peer-to-peer led community, much more than like the one guy. I mean, the one guy can leave in whatever form that takes, and the community can continue to exponentially grow if it's set up right.
Yes, exactly. Well, that'll be a different podcast episode when we do cults and communities, right? So finally, got to talk about cults on a podcast.
Finally, found my guy.
Yeah. So, well, with that though, I mean, obviously, Austin, that was great. Love that in terms of the offer. The last thing I'll just put a button on that is, in the end, the goal is to be intentional, right? It should really be a funnel, people. A funnel, crazy, right? From podcast episode to ultimate, whatever the last thing is that they're going to buy. And you want to have that ascension plan. So let's go to, I realized I want to call it a pinwheel, but it wasn't a pinwheel.
Flywheel.
Flywheel. Okay, the flywheel. And I don't remember what the flywheel is called, just that we were going to talk about it. So let's transition to the flywheel.
Sweet. Well, flywheels are something I'm also passionate about. And I have to give credit to Nathan Barry, who's hosting the conference I'm in town for this week, Craft and Commerce, really cool guy at ConvertKit. He talks a lot about flywheels. So if someone's like, I really like this idea, like just Google Nathan Barry flywheels. He's written a lot about it. But in the simplest form, a flywheel is, I like to describe it as like, it's an actual physical thing. Like in engineering, you can create a flywheel. But I think for most people in their childhood, they were on a merry-go-round at some point, right?
Ah, yes.
So imagine you're on a merry-go-round, or you're not. There's 20 people, and they're like, hey, Kyle, come spin us. And you're like,
you're describing me at a playground with my kids. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And that first rotation is really hard, right? And the second rotation is a little bit easier. And eventually you're just like using your finger. Yeah. But if you stop, it'll stop. So it's not a perpetual motion, but it's pretty close to it, right? So this idea that you get this momentum built and spinning, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating machine. So there's lots of examples of that in marketing. In my world, in podcast guesting, I was fortunate enough to speak at Traffic and Conversion Summit this year and Podfest, and I spoke about this. So if people can hit me up if they want to see a deeper version. I spent 45 minutes talking just about this.
Oh, nice.
But the idea is the podcast interview is the source of energy. So like that's the thing that gets us cranking. And if you imagine like just a wheel, and we're going like clockwise around this wheel, that enters up and starts spinning this wheel through growing your email list, making direct sales, making indirect long tail sales, building relationships with the host, building relationships with the other guests, building relationships with the audience, content repurposing. and then imagine like authority is right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So the definition of a flywheel is actually that every rotation of a flywheel is more powerful and easier than the previous rotation. So the idea is like the first podcast I get on is hard. I got to write my pitch for the first time. I've never done this before. The third one's easier, but it's still effort. But by like the 10th one, because you're constantly building your email list, growing your sales, growing your relationships, and growing your content, which grows your authority, it's easier to get on bigger and bigger shows and have a bigger and bigger impact with each one. To the point now, like I don't pitch anyone. Like pretty much everything happens inbound or through referrals because I've built a machine and I built this flywheel effect that I do put effort into it. I'm showing up here to do the interviews.
Yeah.
But there's to be so much content that comes out of this, right? And there's hopefully sales that might come out of this. Some people get on my email list. You and I are going to have a deeper relationship. The other guests that have been on here, I will reach out to them and say, hey, I really admire what you do, and I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'll grow my LinkedIn, all of which grows my authority so that the next person I meet at this conference this week, I can be like, oh, I was just on with Kyle on their show, and like, oh, I love their show, and like, I'd love to have you on my show. And you can see how this, it's like a virtuous cycle. But if I stop, it stops. So you do have to continue to do it, but your role as the entrepreneur should pretty quickly, in the way that we build things, get to literally showing up and doing interviews.
Yeah.
And then this machine takes over and makes the sales, referrals, and builds all the relationships for you.
It's really the thing of that flywheel. It's really where people enter. They think they're just going to show up and make money, right? So if you want that, if that's your dream, you got to put all the work in to make that flywheel happen. So no, that is a beautiful metaphor. I'm really glad you brought that up because that is super cool because you'd see how it just keeps picking up. And I love that because I almost feel like if we could redefine grind culture into flywheel culture, I think people would be a lot happier.
Yeah.
Because ultimately grinding in something that takes the same effort every single time is being Sisyphus.
Yeah.
Which isn't really what we are all aspiring to.
No.
No one wants to roll that up.
Start over every time.
Yeah. So the idea of a flywheel, and that's what grind culture should represent, is we're going to grind to push only to eventually nudge later. We don't want to grind forever. So no, that's beautiful. Well, we're circling on this. It's funny. We talked before the beginning. It's like, we shoot for 30, 45 minutes. Like, this is going to be a really long one. If we
I tend to be the longest interview on everyone's show, so I don't know if that's good or bad, but we're still
I think
talking.
It's good. I think it's good. So, the last one, because I was really excited about, let's use this as our crescendo. I want you to tell me how you took this flywheel mentality to target a specific, not like a specific individual that would listen or individuals that would listen that led to a really, really big deal for you guys. Like that is super fascinating to me. I hope it's fascinating to our listeners because this is the most fascinating thing you've said so far. So please tell me about kind of how you were able to target this, the research into it, and just tell me the story because I'm super fascinated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't even care the cameras are here. This is all I care about.
Yeah, and I don't know. This was in fall 2020.
So this was a while ago.
It was a while ago. And actually, the result of it actually happened a year later. So that's part of the story.
Well, even better.
So there was this podcast that it probably still exists. It was called Brand Builders. And I was doing all my e-com research and trying to see where can I go talk about Fire Creek Snacks and our business story. And I found this, and it was like, this is cool because they do deep dives into brands, like packaging, naming, flavor profile. Like they're really into it. And I realized that most of the people they're interviewing are actually their clients or their well, I don't have to build up the suspense. The vice president of this company called Snack Nation is the host of this podcast, or at least he was at the time.
Gotcha.
So I noticed that like a lot of the people he's interviewing are people they're featuring in the subscription box called Snack Nation. And their business model was basically sending huge boxes of healthy snacks to break rooms as like a corporate benefit.
Yeah.
And the time that I encountered them, it was in COVID. So they just shifted their entire business model to shipping it to people's houses.
Yeah.
And so it was just an interesting time for our story too. So I said, hey, we're not in your box yet. We'd love to be. However, I'd love to do an interview and get to know you. And I think we have a really compelling story, especially in this time of COVID, because it had such a dramatic impact on our own business model. And he was gracious, and we connected on LinkedIn, actually, and I pitched him through like DMs on LinkedIn. And he said, yeah, like I'd be open to that. Let's chat. And so it was actually the only interview that Ryan and I ever did together. He's like, I would actually like both of you guys to be on so we can tell your full like partnership story. Cool. So it was a pretty deep interview. Built a great relationship with him. His name's Jordan, and thought that was cool. And I had two underlying strategic reasons to do this. One was I wanted to say, as seen on Brand Builders, for credibility, because this is early in this journey, right? And two was was like, man, if I could donate snacks to your box, would you put them in some? You know, sort of, and that I can say I've seen in Snack Nation, and give even more credibility because we were getting a lot of interest from other subscription boxes, but this was like the big one. So I was like, hey, if we're good enough for them, we're good enough for you. And so after the interview, so I didn't try to do any of this before the interview, but after the interview, I reached back and I said, hey, I thought that went great. I really appreciate the time. He said, yeah, I really appreciate your guys' story. And I said, hey, I know we're way smaller than all these other brands you work with, but you appreciate the story. Like, I'm not expecting you to buy anything from us, but I would love to gift you the minimum amount of snacks and let you get feedback on it. So he's like, yeah, I think we can do that. So we ended up donating, I think it was like 8,000 snack sticks, right? So it actually cost us money. But we got this like Nielsen level consumer feedback, which made us feel good, but also was like validation. Is like, no, this does really taste good. Like, look, this is like independent feedback. So we had that, and we had that as seen on Snack Nation. And I was like, home run. Killed it. This is awesome. I think it was like, it came out in like January 2021, if I remember correctly. And I thought, that's it. Well, January 2022 rolls around, and I get this email, and it says Sharon@Karoo.com, and it's like the subject line was like capacity. And I'm like, who is this? And so turns out that Karoo became the parent company of Snack Nation, and Sharon was the new salty, I think they call it salty snacks category manager or whatever, right? So
such a weird thing to put on a business card. I'm the salty snacks manager.
And that's a real thing. So what's crazy is this email was basically like, hey, Dustin, I've been profiling the people in our category that we've featured, and your story stuck out. So I went and listened to your show, and I just think it's amazing. So I sampled, and I think it tastes great. Your customer feedback was great. What's your capacity? And I'm like, no one's ever asked us that before. I'm like, that's a good question.
It's always exciting when somebody asks you that.
I'm like, let me find out. And so we went back and forth and negotiated a little bit on pricing, but she basically said, we want you to be the healthy meat stick for the year. And we had these monthly purchase orders coming in at a pretty decent margin. And so we were not only getting paid, it ended up being $550,000 of total purchase orders, but you know, they're going into, we always say, like, depending on the audience at a trade show, you're going to try to get someone to stop. And so, again, I'd use this with caution, but it was funny at times, usually to middle-aged men who were like hardware store owners, be like, hey, let me put my meat in your mouth. Right? This idea.
It does sound like something I would do as well.
Exactly. You got to do that sometimes. What I'm saying is, like, in the clean version of that, like, we actually got our product. We got the meat in the mouths of, like, tons of ideal clients. Because the people consuming these on the end users were, like, millennial, high income, and these people work at Facebook, Apple, Google. It's like that kind of environment. And like ideal customers. So it really not only got us direct purchase value that had some profit margin in it, but it was a huge distribution opportunity for us. So that's the story. But like, I chose that podcast intentionally. You know, I always care about the audience, but it was really about, I want to know this host. I want to know this vice president. I want to get a relationship. I want to understand what he values. And it turned into like so much more than I could have expected. So, but it took a year. It was a year later. It's like all this just came out, and it felt like it came out of nowhere. But there's no way it happens without that. And our Walmart story, which I won't necessarily get into today, same thing. It was like the most random person who worked in finance, some 23-year-old kid, was like, I love what you're doing. He actually became my very first paid client.
Oh, wow.
He hired me to help him with his YouTube channel. And he ended up connecting us with someone who connected us with someone who started building a relationship. And it took 2.5 years, but we ended up on the shelves of Walmart. Zero chance that happens without me being a podcast guest and planting that seed with this guy and having this relationship emerge from it. So,
man, it feels serendipitous as the flywheel spins, right? You just keep it going. You never know what it's going to attract. That is fantastic.
What's cool about it too, if this isn't obvious to people, it's free. So, you know, I'm not against paid ads. They're awesome, but this is free. Literally your investment in it is doing what I love, which is teaching and telling stories and sharing my past. Like, how cool is it to be able to show up, talk into a microphone, especially as a guest, because you don't have to do any of the production. You just, and then they send you.
Dylan's job. That sounds miserable. No one wants that.
So, you know, I think as we're talking about this, it starts to sound complex. You can make it more complex and advanced as your business grows and you want it to, but it's really simple. It's like you literally find shows that you think the audience would be cool and you think they would be in your ideal market. You get on and tell your story. You have a really good call to action. And then you can do some very basic relationship building stuff on the back of it and have huge results without any risk, without spending any money. I don't know. I think it's one of the best things in the world because of all the stuff we've talked about. But in that flywheel, I kind of glossed over like the relationship with the host, the other guests, and the audience. the actual thing that makes podcast guesting to me one of the best marketing channels is it's one of the few places you can build true relationships at scale.
Yeah.
It's like you and I are going to know each other way better after sitting behind these mics. And
Yeah.
anyone who listens to this for 45 minutes or however long we're going to go, they're deep. They know me in a pretty deep way. I've been in their earbuds, usually in their meditative state while they're running or driving and doing stuff. It's a very powerful medium. And anyone that knows marketing, like everything we do is try to know, like, and trust and close that loop, right? And you can do that through billboards and direct mail and Facebook ads and all that stuff. It takes like 77 touch points. Or you can sit down at one interview, share your heart, share your emotions, share your true self, and like connect with people on a deep level directly. And I think that's what's so cool about it.
Well, and it's one of those things that's the conversation we're all trying to have, right? At the end of the day, I want to bare my soul to connect with the consumer in a way that both of us feel better off in the end, right? And so you're right, doing that through content, it's impossible.
And everyone wins. There is it's this classic abundance thing. Like if I come on here and I do a good job, it makes you look good. You've got a new relationship. You've got new content. It makes me look good. I have content. I'm going to build relationships. And if I did a good job, it serves the audience. So it's a win-win-win, and we all end up better, and no one loses. And I think that's what's also cool about it.
Agreed. That's fantastic. Well, with that, again, we're going to make this a Joe Rogan podcast and keep it up. So let's take a bathroom break and talk about aliens. No, just kidding. That's a different time. So we did talk about cults. We're already there. Have you heard about breatharians? No, just kidding. Anyway, so, well, it was fantastic. This is great. My mind is spinning. I hope all of your minds are also just on fire with, I love when somebody come in with something that doesn't feel crazy or feels like, well, that's not new information, yet reveals it to be entirely new and yet not complicated. Like I said, it's really not complicated. It's work, but many things that aren't complicated and take work in life are normally the best things that we should be doing, right? Yep. Like, and we get into health and fitness, diets, weight loss, all that stuff. At the end of the day, if you just work more than you put in and you try and be healthy and sleep, you're probably going to be all right, right?
Yeah, right.
It just takes work. And so I love that. It's really simple. It's really amazing. We really appreciate your time, especially knowing you have other things going on, but you came out early just for us. It was amazing. And so with that, guys, we're going to let you get going. We'll hang out a little bit more this evening. But for all the listeners, thank you so much for your time. Please rate, review, subscribe. Actually, before we go, Dustin, what if people want to, they
gotta have a call to action.
Yeah, man. And they want to get a hold of you. How do they get the call to action? Before we get to that, what's the call to action? How can they engage with you? How can they be on your list? How can they join your mastermind, man?
Absolutely.
Of it.
Yeah. So everything's really simple. 7figureleap.com. Leap like jumping. And that's about our sweet spot is helping 6-figure entrepreneurs grow into 7-figure entrepreneurs and often solopreneurs, and doing that in a quantum leap. So doing it fast through relationship building and through podcast guesting. So if you go to 7figureleap.com, you will see our values and the things that we do. You'll see an ability to book a call if you are interested in knowing more about our accelerator program, which is that 90-day program I've talked about several times. We can help you build that flywheel for your business. And if you're not ready for that yet, we have amazing free resources on there. So we've got an assessment you can take and start to understand the gaps maybe in your 5 Ps and what you're trying to do. We've got a really cool calculator that people can put in some basic business information, and it'll estimate, depending on their goals and the frequency and size of shows they want to be on, it'll be like, this is how much you should be making with podcast guesting. We've got really strong proprietary data for that. So yeah, I'm going on and on, but the simple thing is 7figureleap.com. Choose your own adventure when you get there, but we do all things podcast guesting and masterminding.
Beautiful. I love that. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. In fact, I'm going to go even a step ahead. Too much fun. But you mentioned the different options. We'll see if we can get the links for those and put in the show notes. So go to the website no matter what. Yeah. But if you want some efficiency, we'll get you there even faster to where you want to go. So that's awesome, man. Yeah, I can't believe I almost forgot. That's how engaging the podcast was. I never forget the CTA. And I was like, oh my gosh. So really awesome job, Dustin. Again, to the people, thank you for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. Reach out to us with any questions. But more importantly, as Thomas would say, who's not here enjoying his new baby, happy scaling. And I would say until next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.